Our speaker is Morten, who Jason just introduced briefly, but a bit more about him. He's a sociologist, and he's one of the leading de-radicalization experts in Denmark. He has expertise in the dynamic and ideologies of politically radical, militant, and violent groups and individuals. He works closely with practitioners in local, national, and international crime prevention efforts. Having completed a master's thesis on youth delinquency and self-report surveys, he went on to implement a scientific approach to crime prevention in his local municipality. Since then, Morten has moved on to engaging in an array of projects revolving around crime prevention and preventative interventions in the field of counterterrorism and violent extremism. And it's my great pleasure to be welcoming Morten as a guest speaker today. Morten, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Jason, for having me. Thank you, Alex, for hosting this session and making it all technically possible, because none of us boomers would be able to. So hi, everyone. I'm going to see if I can share my screen in a minute and start the presentation. First of all, I think it would be good to give you a historic overview of what the EU has done in terms of countering violent extremism. So I think I'll start following 9/11, because that had a great impact, not just in your country, but throughout the world, and in Europe in particular, being a close ally to the US, and also having some of the same issues as the US, being active with our military in different parts of the world. So in 2008, the EU Counterterrorism Coordinator, Mr. Gilles de Kerchove, he made this project to counter violent extremism, and he actually chose Denmark as sort of a laboratory to try and figure out what can be done. And why did he choose Denmark? Well, Denmark is a really small country, but a country nonetheless, of 5.5 million inhabitants. Denmark is also known for being part of Scandinavia and having the welfare system, the Scandinavian welfare system. And I'm not going to go into politics and talk politics. You've had enough of that the last couple of months, I guess. But what the Scandinavian welfare model is a very close-knit security grid under its inhabitants. So, I mean, no matter how bad things are in your life, you can always expect to get help from your municipality or from the government. This also means that you can test out different kinds of approaches really fast, and you can get both results but also evaluations done in a timely manner. So Gilles de Kerchove, he chose Denmark, and he would like us to make 3 different projects. One project in Copenhagen, which is our capital. One project is in Aarhus, which is our 2nd largest city. And our 2nd largest city only has 250,000 inhabitants. And then the 3rd one was to take place in prisons. I was so fortunate that at the time I had applied for a job with our equivalent to your FBI, and I came in 2nd for the job. So when they called and turned me down and said, "Morten, you didn't get the job," bummer, I thought. And then they said, "Well, we still need you." And I was like, "What do you mean?" Being a bit paranoid at this point. What do you need me for? But they needed me to be on board these EU-funded projects to see if we could find ways to counter violent extremism. And I started off in Aarhus. Aarhus made a model that was based on awareness training. So they wanted to to make all professionals aware, and they also wanted to introduce mentorship or mentoring for radicalized individuals. And they wanted me on board for my particular knowledge on group-based risk behavior regarding youth delinquency, but also because of my knowledge about the far left and the far right. So I got on board in Aarhus, and then they had a visit from the guys over in Copenhagen. Copenhagen had a different approach. They were all about equipping front personnel, so basically social workers, pedagogues, teachers, to be able to address extremism themselves. That was their approach. And they found out that I was living not far from Copenhagen, so they wanted me on board in their project. Well, nice. So I got on board. And then the third partner, which is the prisons, they met me and I met them, and they were like, would you like to come on board in our program and try maybe and mentor one of the guys who is in prison for terrorism charges? And I was like, yeah, I get the chance to like really meet one, a live one. So really interesting times around 2010 to 2013. And then in 2011, the civil war in Syria broke out. And within a couple of years, the recruitment to the civil war in Syria was massive. ISIS specifically targeted delinquent youths from Europe. And I think the numbers were some 30,000, maybe some numbers up to 50,000 youths traveled to Syria to join ISIS in the civil war. So that became the sole narrative almost of countering violent extremism. And it seemed like someone forgot about the extreme left and the extreme right. But let me see if I can share the presentation and we can get on with it. I just wanted to like set the scene. I've got too many windows open at once. Just a second. I'll see if I can, yeah, there we are. Okay, so this is what's known as the Danish model. In Aarhus, they would call it the Aarhus model, but that's just Aarhus for you. They're like the second biggest city, but they all say that they're the smallest great city of the world. So the Danish model, but in Aarhus, the Aarhus model. The Aarhus model is based on capacity building first and foremost. That's the way we do it. So capacity building is part of the basic training for all who join law enforcement. It's also part of the basic training for social workers. It's also part of the basic training for prison officers and so on. And what do I mean when I say it's part of the basic training? It's not so it's all of the basic training, but it's sort of an add-on, because this is really not rocket science. This is a form, at least that's how I see it. This is a form of risk behavior, just like any other kind of risk behavior, but there's just this inbuilt risk that something really bad could happen from this type of risk behavior. You're not just going to hurt yourself, you might hurt a whole bunch of people. So it's part of basic training in the form of like a 2-day seminar where our equivalent of FBI is called PET, PET, but not PET the way you think. And then they're very not PET-like. at all. They're very FBI-like. So they give a seminar for front personnel. There's also awareness training going on for people who are already in employment. So for instance, the place I'm working now is a municipality of 55,000 inhabitants, and we have close to 1,000 front personnel, social workers. So we're training them in the awareness of what is radicalization, what is violent extremism, how do you distinguish it from other types of behavior, how do you distinguish it from negative social control and other types of things that might be going on, giving them a background knowledge of what it is, and also giving them, or trying to give them, cultural sensitivity so as not to flag anything false. Every time there's a terrorist incident somewhere in Europe, we're getting a lot of false positives, meaning that people are flagging any and everything. So for instance, following the attacks in France a couple of weeks back and the attack in Vienna, we send out this bulletin that people should report anything to us, and please do so right away, so we can act on it if it's serious. And I got stuff like school papers from students sent from the teachers. They were worried about this student because he had been writing a school paper that he was going to bomb the school with some fireworks, I think it was. And I mean, this kid, he's got a ton of social problems and a ton of professionals that are all on top of him. I mean, no need to worry. He's gonna make it. But he wrote this fun, I thought it was fun, the essay about bombing the school, but nothing serious in it. So, but it's great that the network works and we're getting things flagged at an early point, so we can also act and react. And in some cases, you know, being this vigilant might stop stuff like school shootings and possibly terrorist attacks. So what makes capacity building a success? Being successful in capacity building is, I mean, it's difficult to measure, right? You can measure your activities. So we've trained 6,000 professionals, but training 6,000 professionals in something that they might have forgotten tomorrow or in a year or next year, is that a success? Not really. So it's really difficult to measure. But I think if you measure for the kinds of responses you get from frontline workers, from social workers, if they respond to you with something that are not false positives, something that they should report, if they're reporting what they should be reporting, then I would say it's a success. If they're reporting any and everything, I mean, you're gonna drown in reports. So I tried that a couple of years back. I was working in the security and intelligence unit of our prison and probation service, dealing with all the incarcerated extremists. And I started out on my first day, I had 400 reports. And I was like, what? These criminals are like this radicalized? And I started reading into the reports, and what I saw was there was no context. It was written like a typical prison report. The prisoner said this, we said this, the prisoner said that, and then we did this. But there was no context. So I drove out and visited prisoners in prison and talked to them. And I remember this one guy I was talking to, and I asked him, so do you remember the day when you told the staff to go and F themselves and that you would burn down the prison and you would blow up the parliament. And he was like, yeah, I'm never gonna forget that day. And I was like, okay, so what happened? What else happened? Because I only got your words and what the prison staff said. I didn't get anything else. So he told me that his wife had filed for sole parency, I think it's called, sole parency of their kids. So that day he lost his 3 or 4 kids, and he was never allowed to see them again until at least they had turned 18 and wanted to see him themselves. So on this day, he loses 4 kids, and he's really angry. And he's feeling that everyone is harassing him, the other inmates, the staff, and he gets into a conflict with some of the prison staff, and he yells this. And I just thought, wow, if I had lost my kids, I'm never going to see them again. My wife took them. I'm not allowed close to them. I can't even call them. And I was in prison. There was nothing I could do about it. I'm not sure I would, settle for talking about blowing up the parliament that day. I would be in a rage. So as it turned out, a lot of these reports that seemed legit when you read them, when you like really digged into them, a lot of them were also false positives. So I managed to, through training, to get the rate down. But I think the most successful thing was when we stopped seeing spikes. I made a graph of how many reports we would get a month. And every time there had been a terrorist incident somewhere in the world, we would have a spike. But after training, the spikes stopped, and we had a steady flow of valid reports. Well, enough about reporting and capacity building that way. But capacity building is not just something that rests with one single actor. In Denmark, we have a very close cooperation between different actors on the field. So we have the state administration, we have all the authorities, and that's health and mental health. It's also our regions, which is, I guess we could call it similar to your states. And the municipalities play a key role in this. And then at one point, private actors tried to get in on it because it was a booming business, and private actors might have, something good to add. As it turned out, in Denmark, we chose not to use private actors in the field of countering violent extremism because the role was already filled by local and national government. I think definitely in some countries with a different setup, private actors could play a role. But I don't know if you followed the terrorist incident in Vienna. I mean, it was not until the next day that the government in Austria said, oh, we outsourced this management of released extremist prisoners to a private company, and they really didn't do the job very well. And you can tell this is the result. We should have maybe done it ourselves or hired a different company. So, I mean, it turned out to be sort of like a scapegoat for them. So using private companies for this type of task is also a way to relieve yourself of responsibility. And I mean, that's not how we do stuff. We take our responsibility. Actually, one of our ministers just got fired today because he took responsibility and then he left his chair. So this is in Danish, and it's like a screenshot, so I couldn't go and translate it. It says, how do the PET, our equivalent of the FBI, prevent? Out here it says criminogenous and ideological factors, up and down. And this is our prevention triangle. This is used by health departments throughout the world in, I think, cancer. I've seen it in cancer treatment. So it's red, and normally it's yellow, and then it's green. So the green is the primary sphere of prevention of crime. This is 95 to 97% of society. This is where most of the prevention is happening. This is about making the public thrive and making sure that the public is predisposed to choosing a sound and democratic path, also to voice their frustrations, the freedom of speech, for instance, to uphold that. And every public administration and every actor is working in that field to try and prevent extremism. The secondary sphere is individuals and groups who are in the high risk of that they may join a radical group or a radical thinking. So this secondary sphere is for the crime prevention cooperation between different entities. The legislation is then in Denmark is so that we can share information between authorities. So the S, and P, that's schools, social services, and police. We can share information about individuals without their consent, based on the premise that we're doing it to prevent crime. The sharing of information cannot be utilized in solving a crime. So investigations can't be helped by anyone but the police. There's also the PSP. The PSP is for psychiatry, social services, and police. And the same legislation goes for that. So psychiatry and social services and police can share information as long as we do it to prevent crime. The KSP, the K is for the prison and probation service, and the same law applies. So this is where we get close to both individuals and groups, but when they're at risk. They haven't done anything, they're just deemed to be at-risk groups. They may be flirting with some ideology, and we're particularly worried when people have gang relations and are flirting with some sort of extremist ideology, because then they are already prone to use violence. They may have access to firearms, and if you add an ideology to that, they will have a motive or a cause to fight for. So the tertiary sphere, that's where the militant extremist behavior is. In this field, it's always involving the PET, the police intelligence, but also the prison and probation service, the local law enforcement, and the municipalities. The PET are mainly handling those who are going to do something right now. And the rest of us are working with those who did something, and we're working with their return to society. So the reintegration, rehabilitation, and sometimes just not even re-socialization, but socialization, because some of these individuals have not been socialized. So it's from the get-go socialization. Yeah, so that's an overview of how all the authorities in Denmark are working together on different levels. The next model, and here it gets even more complicated. So over here you have national, here you have local. You might be thinking, oh, that's almost like in our language. Well, yeah, the Vikings did have an impact in the world back in the day. It's 1,000 years ago. Here it says security, and here it says thriving. So over here, it's all about thriving. Over here, it's all about security. On this scale, it's on the national level, and here it's on the local level. So the entities here are SIRI, which is our National Counter-Extremism Coordinator. They are the ones doing all the capacity building and like making ends meet between all the involved entities. Over here you have national security. You guessed it, that's PET. But down here we have our police precinct and the municipality. And we're already working together on all these levels, the SSP, the KSP, and the PSP. And information goes back and forth this way. It always goes through the local police district or precinct, and then goes to the PT. And this is to install sort of a filter of information, because out here where I'm working currently, we shouldn't get all the information, because this is classified information, but we should feed information this way, again, under the premise that we do it to prevent something bad from happening. But they can also have been working, for instance, if the PET have been working on a prevention case for a while, and they deem it safe to let go of that case and to let someone else work with it, they're going to de-escalate what they're doing and send it to the local police, and the local police together with the municipality and the prison and probation system will take care of the individual. On the other hand, if we've been working with an individual and that individual is still on a wrong path, we can say, we can no longer work with this individual. You guys up here need to take over. So cases go back and forth this way. And I can give you an example of a case. There was a young guy. He had grown up in quite a traditional family. They owned, I think, 1 or 2 pizza places. And when he came of age, he started going to business school. And on his 18th birthday, his parents gave him the keys to a pizza place. So, young man, you're gonna take over this pizza place, make pizzas, make money, and you're gonna care for us, and we're gonna retire. And he was really proud. He was so proud that he had his own pizza place, and going to business school, he of course knew about business. He had been to business school for like full 3, maybe 4 months. So he knew everything about business, except for taxes and salaries and stuff. So within a short period of time, everybody was on his back. The employees didn't want to work for him because he didn't pay. The people delivering him like stuff to make pizza from, all the groceries and goods, they didn't want to deliver anymore because he didn't pay. And the tax man was on his back because, you know, he didn't pay his taxes. At the same time, his younger brother he wasn't being nice. He was stealing and stuff. He was also stealing from him. His girlfriend, she was not sure she was going to marry him. His sister, his sister had left her husband, I think. So there's a lot of stuff going on with him and his family that he didn't approve of. But he had learned at a very young age, if you've got problems, you should, ask God. So he wanted to find God again and to ask God, what should I do with this? So he went online, and being Muslim of faith, he was like looking for someone to like teach him about Islam. So he found islameducation.dk, and he went on that page and he heard some sermons and they made sense, and he really wanted to meet this guy who held the sermons, a guy called Abu Ahmed. And he was listening to Abu Ahmed, and he started chatting with Abu Ahmed, and Abu Ahmed was like, my brother, you should come and listen to me live. I'm really more powerful in my sermons when you hear me live. And he thought he was going to a mosque, but he wasn't, because Abu Ahmed didn't preach in a mosque. Abu Ahmed preached in a small flat with a small study group. And he was like, oh, study group, that's a good idea. I'm going to study Islam because it might help me. So, but what Abu Ahmed told him was, paying taxes, that's against Islam, that's against Sharia, it's haram. You can't do that. And do you know what they use your tax money for? They use it to bomb your brothers and sisters in Syria. So don't pay your taxes. And then he said, but I also have this loan and I'm paying interest rates. And Abu Ahmed said, interest rates, that's haram. You shouldn't pay it. Abu Ahmed also told him that his sister was on the wrong path, his brother was on the wrong path, and that he should beat up his fiancée because she was on the wrong path and she needed to be corrected. And then Abu Ahmed went on to saying, well, young man, I think you should leave all this earthly life behind, and you should go and seek God and assist our God in fighting the evil dictator down in Syria. And this young man, he was like, yeah, Abu Ahmed, you and me together, we're gonna go and fight this evil man. And Abu Ahmed said, my son, God gave me a role to be right here and to help young people like you find God and find the right path for them. And it's your path to go to Syria, and it's my path to stay behind and to help others like yourself. So this guy went to Syria twice. He came back and he was imprisoned for 7 years, and he's been extradited from the country. So this case with this particular young man, it started out here with the municipality and the local police. They couldn't stop him because he started seeing Abu Ahmed more and more. So the more he saw Abu Ahmed, it was turned over to the PET, and he was monitored, and he was approached a couple of times, and they tried to make him turn around through dialogue and conversation. But he was just hell-bent on going away to see if he could do make something different in the world. He wasn't there because he really wanted to fight. He was there because he wanted a better world. There's this altruism about a lot of these guys. They don't do it to harm anyone else. They want the perfect world. I don't know why I did that. So what do we know about extremism? Well, there are the regular criminogenic factors. There are risk factors, protective factors, and there are also causal factors that lead to radicalization. I think there was this scholar, he's a British scholar, I forgot his name, but he had identified more than 200 different models that would model how radicalization looks. And I mean, for every social scientist in Europe, you will find a different model. So you can find a very wide variety of models modeling what does it look like. But the fact is, you know, you can model it all you want, but unless your model is like extremely simple, then it's not going to fit every case, because there are no two cases that are exactly alike. Then there's also the presence of signs of change. So if a person is changing their behavior or the way they look, what they are saying, that presence is it's always there in all cases when we backtrack it. It's also important to underline that the radicalization process is never linear. You can't have a linear process. It just doesn't happen. Well, in the models, in the books, yeah. Real life, not so much. I think it's best described as a dynamic psychosocial phenomenon. That's what it is, and that's also what I believe, because that's the only way I can truly vouch for that it's possible to turn someone around, someone who is prone to extremism. But what are we doing about it? Well, we're trying to get into cases as early as possible. We're trying to do it with a multi-sector view. So we get all kinds of different professionals around the individual to see them from all sides. So sometimes we would use a teacher that they had. We would like to have a psychologist. We would like to have a couple of social workers, maybe street workers. So we get a 360-degree view of the person in question, the person we're going to work with. And then it's absolutely mandatory that we don't make parallel efforts. It has to be unison. So everything we're doing, we have to communicate to each other. If we're making it parallel, there is a chance of counterproductivity. So a little bit about the violent extremist, or the forms of violent extremism that we see. This is also in Danish. I've put it into 5 different categories. First off, the most seldom one that we see is ethno-nationalist and separatist extremism. So in Denmark, we have immigrants from somewhere around 150 to 160 different nations. And some of those nations are under pressure from other nations, neighboring nations. Maybe there's a civil war going on between factions, between groups, between tribes in those nations. And they may have some sort of either experience with violent extremism or an adhesion to violent extremism that has to do with where they or their family came from. So in Europe, I think the main groups are like the IRA, the Irish Republican Army. It's ETA in Spain, which is a Basque separatist organization. The groups in the Balkans, for instance, the Kosovars, the Albanians, the Serbian group, the Croatian group, they may also have experience with or an adhesion to ethno-nationalism. But we also see them from the rest of the world. The thing is, this is seldomly a problem locally in Denmark. They don't have any activities here that is a risk to national security. There may be brawls between, for instance, Turks and Kurds in the street, but mostly people just stay to themselves. this is conflict going on somewhere else. Then there is the single issue violent extremism. Single issue violent extremism is also rare, and there is often this, there's some sort of politics behind, but sometimes it's just, you know, I don't want fracking going on, or I don't want people holding animals for their fur, or go vegan, or something like that. And people will attack hunters, butchers, even the milkman. We have had incidents in Scandinavia of milk trucks being burned by vegan militants, like violent extremist vegans. There's a butcher shop in France and one in England also that got attacked, and the butcher was beaten, and they wanted to murder him because he was slicing up animals. So that's single issue extremism for you. They're rare, but they exist. Then the left-wing extremism, the right-wing extremism, and the Islamist or jihadi extremism. Those are the most common forms and what we see often most. So this is what it looks like in our context. Up here, neo-Nazi skinheads from the Danish National Socialist Party. It's a fully legal demonstration, and this is particularly a march to commemorate a German World War II general, or whatever. No, he was a politician, I think, Rudolf Hess. It's on his birthday, so they're celebrating his birthday. These are the same guys, neo-Nazi skinheads. Then we had this relatively new offspring to the extreme right wing. This is the Danish Defense League, and they learned from the British or English Defense League down here. Those guys were very violent and very anti-Muslim in what they did. They would fly Israeli flags at demonstrations, and to provoke Muslims. These guys were, I think, a lot of them were incarcerated after a short while, and they still exist, but they're so few and far between. Right now, it's the neo-Nazis that have the upper hand in Scandinavia, and it's a pan-Scandinavian. So it's not nationalist. It's more like Scandinavians are Aryans, and because they're Aryans, we have this common front against people of other skin tones, and also against Jews. Breivik, I don't know if you know him, but Anders Breivik, smart guy, because he had figured out how everything is working. So he was stopping the influx of immigrants into Norway by killing the Socialist Party youth camp, because the Socialist Party had been inviting all these immigrants. So if he killed the attendees at the youth camp, there would be no socialist politicians. Hence, they wouldn't invite any more brown people from other countries. And I know Jason has some love for Tolkien. Actually, Breivik was listening to the music from Tolkien when he did his mass murder. Because in Tolkien, you have, I don't know, you have the Battle of Helm's Deep. And Helm's Deep is meant to be the battle for Vienna in, I think it's 400 or 500 years ago, when the Muslims came from Turkey and they wanted to invade Europe, and they were stopped at the gates of Vienna. And this whole myth about Vienna and the gates of Vienna and it's been exploited by both the right-wing side, but also by the Muslim side. So the myth goes that the baker in Vienna actually baked, what was it, croissant, which means crescent in French. So he baked a crescent-shaped bread to warn that the Muslims were coming. So when ISIS took over Raqqa in Syria, they made a fatwa against croissant, against crescent-shaped bread. And Breivik, on the other hand, he felt like he was defending the walls of Vienna whilst killing children on a youth camp on an island in Norway. So let's move on. The left wing, you have that in the US, I know. Anti-fascist action, Black Bloc, they make a lot of trouble because they always come out in great numbers. They don't like the banks, they don't like the government, they don't like the law, they don't like the system. In Denmark, we also say they don't like their parents, because a lot of them are like really young, 15, 16-year-olds, and they come from, a lot of them come from really well-off backgrounds, and it's their formative years. They don't pose a threat to national security in Denmark as it is now. But in the middle here, it says Blekinge, and that's, I would say, the only left-wing terrorist group we've ever had. They were doing bank robberies, sending the money to the PFLP in Palestinian territories near Israel. They also stole a lot of weapons from the military, from weapons caches all around Denmark. They broke in and they stole them, and they also had access to the police data system. So that's the closest thing we've gotten to a left-wing group posing a threat to national security. The jihadi influenced violent extremists, a lot of what they are doing have been going to Syria. We've had quite a few terrorist cases, but they've been thwarted at an early stage. And as it is now, the police, they wait until they have procured the material to build, for instance, bombs, or they have procured weapons before they arrest them, because they have made so early arrests in the earlier years that they couldn't prosecute, because, you know, that's just household items. Well, you live in a flat. How come you need all this farm equipment in a flat? I mean, do you grow flowers on your porch, or? Yeah, so these cases have been quite difficult. So as it is now, they're waiting till the very last moment, which I think is quite chilling as a citizen that they have to wait this long. But hey, we all have our rights. Down here it says Danish soldiers go to hell. So it's a demonstration against Denmark's participation in conflicts around the world. And this is about democracy. This is a woman with an immigrant background who is a member of, she actually, I think at one point she was a minister for our ruling party, but they want her to shut up. That's why the sticker's there. You know, shut up, democracy will send you straight to hell. It also says democracy is hypocrisy. Moghadam's staircase model, I couldn't help myself. I really had to show you just one model. You should check it out. I can see I'm like running low on time, but Alistair Moghadam, he's an American with an Iranian background. He's a psychology professor, and he made this excellent staircase model. And why do I think it's excellent? Well, because instead of all the linear models, you know, if you do this and do this, you will end up as a terrorist. This is like a building or a set of stairs. So you can walk up to, this is ground floor, first floor, second floor, and then you can de-escalate. And it's the de-escalation part that I like, because conversation, dialogue, working with people, that's something that I really truly believe in, and that I have seen the real life results from. So people can de-escalate. It's not linear. It's not going to lead to terrorism. You might have frustrations at some point in your life, but you can work with those frustrations, and you might need help for it, and then we'll provide the help. So I'm all for mentoring. Is it the only effective method? Well, at one point I said this jokingly, but there's always some truth in jokes, right? So it's not the only method. I mean, I suggested that we should stop doing everything we're doing and just make a dating service. Now, why would we make a dating service? Well, because as it turns out, being in a sound and healthy relationship de-escalates you from doing bad stuff. Not just terrorism, but I mean, relationships are good. So they should just have a date and and not a mentor. But it's not something that we can, as an authority, go into. So we can supply a mentor and not a date. But working directly with extremism or extremists, it is difficult, and it's tiresome, and you really need to hold on to yourself, because people who are this far out, I'd say, are really difficult to talk to. But a few tricks. One is looking for paradoxes. So often when you hear them ranting, you will run into some sort of a paradox, and it's a good idea to put yourself in the lower position and say, I'm sorry, you know, it's like I'm not you, and I'm not smart in this field, and you're telling me this, but you're also telling me this. Could you please help me here? I mean, could you connect the dots for me? That simple question will make them not repeat what they've heard. They need to explain it to you. So you're actually starting a thought process in their mind where they have to take two things that they've heard, but that don't quite combine, and they have to combine them to explain them to you. So that's what we call sowing the seeds of doubt when working with this target group. And I also think that there should be a balance between punishment and treatment. So when we punish people who acted on their beliefs, of course you need to punish, because that's what the public expects and deserves. But you also need to treat, because if you don't treat, you're going to end up with some inmates who are worse off when they're going back into society, when they're released back into society. And if you do, like I think the French did at one point, they made specialized wings for extremist offenders. So you've got 30 or 40 extremist offenders, and you bring them together in one wing. They just learn tricks of each other. So one inmate would say to another, hey, if you just like shave your beard, smoke a lot of cigarettes, maybe smoke some weed, watch a lot of porn, and remember to turn the sound all the way up, you know, so they can't help to overhear it. You know, they're going to say, yeah, we did a good job. We de-radicalized him. Now he's typically French, smoking weed and watching porn. But it actually worked for them. A lot of them were released, and they were deemed safe to release into society. They had tricked the system. That's also what they said about the perpetrator in Austria, that he had tricked the system. So they're going to do that. What you need to be doing is thinning down. And what I mean by thinning down is like if I mean, you can't drink alcohol that's too strong, so you need to thin it down with soda or water or whatever. Same with these guys. They're really strong when they're together. So thin them down, and we're always going to howl like the wolves that we are amongst. And that's a human thing. It's a common thing. So put them together in prison or outside prison with people from other walks of life. Because as humans, we always mirror what we are around. So that's 1 hour, guys. And I believe it's my last slide. Yay. So the Q&A, or where are we going?
Yes, awesome. Thank you, Morten. That was an excellent talk. Yeah, so to start off with, we got a bunch of questions, and your last slide in your joke about starting a dating service piqued the interest of the audience quite a bit. Did you mean that? So when you're talking about how there was a little bit of truth in that, have you actually seen studies that suggest that men in romantic relationships are actually less likely to become radicalized and to commit terrorist attacks?
Well, it's not just terrorism. I mean, being in a healthy relationship will keep you focused on other things in life. So if you look at the Mogada model, it's you're translating what's wrong in your own life. So on the first stair of the Mogada model, you would say, okay, so what is my life like? Well, right now I'm unemployed. I'm feeling poor. I'm not the man I could be. And well, it's not just me, because all the guys who are like me are unemployed, and they could be much more. So it's someone's fault. And then you point your finger at something, and you go on and you go on and you go on, and that's the path to radicalization, that you sort of translate your own well-being to something else, or I don't remember the term in English for when you're like projecting. I think it's called, you're projecting your hurt somewhere else. So yeah. So being in a relationship will definitely keep you occupied with something positive and good.
Makes sense. We also got a couple of questions asking if you could go into a little more detail on how you collect information and monitor potential groups or individuals who are at risk of being radicalized. And I think if you'd be willing to talk both about like in-person strategies, and also if you do any monitoring of online spaces as well.
Yeah, well, I think I'll start with like the early cases. So, or early on in a case. So early on in a case, you might get a report from, say, a school teacher or even parents that are concerned that their kid is going in a wrong direction. So you may start with the horse's mouth. You go and ask the person in question, or you find what I call a by proxy intervention, where you find a professional that's close to the person, and you work with that professional to work with the person. So the person in question doesn't even realize that they're being monitored by us, because we're doing it through someone they know. Moving on, if things get stranger than that, then it's the security and intelligence people that are doing it, and I'm not going to go into what they're doing, but they're doing a lot of stuff to monitor people. And then inside prison, there's also a security and intelligence unit that works with this, and they have a lot of technological capability to listen and look at what people are doing. And that's what they do. And they have an analysis unit that sort of like gathers and makes what they've gathered into usable and valid intelligence to be processed by for instance, the security and intelligence people.
Awesome.
Online?
Yeah, online.
Yeah. Well, you know, in the US, they had this Think Again, Turn Away, I think it was called. That's just, I mean, that's hopeless. Doing something like that, making a campaign online is the worst thing you can do in this respect, because you're not going to hit your target audience. You're going to hit millions of other people that are not your target audience. If you want to hit your target audience, well, you can seek them out online. So if you get a report that someone is posting stuff online, go and find the closest professional and get that professional, do a by proxy, you know, on that person, get the professional to work with the person, find out what are the root causes, why is he posting this stuff, what's going on. Don't approach people online. I mean, it takes skills beyond mine to do that. They did it in Sweden at one point, and they actually were successful in recruiting some top neo-Nazis because they engaged them online. But those were former neo-Nazis engaging active neo-Nazis online and sort of like questioning the narrative and stuff. And that's a private organization doing that. But we could never do that because we have like government. So yeah, but it's an interesting thing, and they have some successes in Sweden with that.
Awesome. One question I had actually is, so you mentioned near the beginning of your presentation that there were some restrictions on where you could share information that you've gathered on in the prevention space. Have you found that the European Union's focus on privacy through legislation like the GDPR or other legislation has actually harmed your ability to carry out your job?
No. That's the short and sweet answer. No, and that's because there's a hierarchy of laws, and you will always have, like, if you've got conflicting laws, there's a hierarchy between them, and the I think the paragraph 115 in the penal code for Denmark, that's what we're working from, that's what it's called, that's higher in rank than the GDPR. And it's also higher in rank than it's called the service law. That's what we work from when we help people. And paragraph 28 in that says you're not allowed to share information without consent. But we've got the trump card, the joker. The joker is our paragraph. Yeah, a lot of people are envious of that paragraph, but it's something that we safeguard, because if you abuse it, if you use it for wrong, if you use it for investigation and stuff, you're like hacking off the branch you're sitting on.
We also had an additional question about mentoring. One of the audience members asked, what is the success rate of mentoring, and do the people being mentored actively consent or seek it out, or is it something that they're required to do as part of their, rehabilitation or punitive programs?
I'm not updated on the numbers. The success rate is high in Denmark, I know, but it also depends on who you take in, because they need to be voluntarily in the program, which also vouches for a high rate of success because they're already voluntarily in the program. The government at one point wanted to change that and make it mandatory, but if you make it mandatory, you're gonna have these I would call it a false intervention, because it would be based on something that is not in sync with what we're trying to do here. Does it work? Well, sometimes you need to work with a person for a very, very long time, and sometimes you can do it in a shorter period of time. I can share with you just a brief case. I've got a lot of cases on that. Maybe we could do another seminar on cases, but there was this guy who worked as a religious scholar in Syria for ISIS. So he was like employed by ISIS, and at one point he came to Denmark and he was arrested, and he was arrested for a long time for joining ISIS, but he was suffering from PTSD. It was quite obvious for me when I met him. He was like crying, sobbing, and like it wasn't at regular times. It was just like frantically, and he would sleep under his bed in prison, stuff like that. It was awful. And I was talking to him, and I offered him a crisis psychologist. So he saw a crisis psychologist 2 times a week for a year and a half. And I got to talk to him about what his hopes and dreams were for his life. He wanted to become a software specialist or an engineer. And I got him a mentor who is a software engineer with a Muslim background. And those 2 guys, they got together and they really got off on good hand together. And today it's like 4 years ago. And this guy, he's studying in a university, but he's also working in the university, studying to become a software engineer. So he went from being one of the most radicalized individuals I've ever worked with to becoming a decent, working, tax-paying, clever, and very, very, very nice person. Yeah. So it definitely works. I don't know. I completely forgot your question.
Could you talk a little bit about whether or not these people actually consent to the mentoring, or is it like something that they're required to do?
Oh yeah, they do. I was the one doing the match inside prison, so my job consisted of getting in there, building rapport, getting to talk to the person, and being allowed to come back at a later point. That was my single purpose, if they allow me to come back. So I would come back, talk to them another time, and ask them if there was anything we could do for them, if they would like someone to talk to, who wasn't their family or friends or other inmates, if they would like someone to socialize with. And they were like, is it an agent? And I was like, no, we're not allowed to bring agents into prisons. So this is just a person to help you with your everyday needs and to talk to you about stuff that, because you can't share your vulnerabilities with other inmates, they're going to prey on you. And you don't share how bad you're feeling with your family because they're going to constantly be worried about you. So your vulnerabilities and your worries, you don't have anywhere to share them. So a mentor is a good place to share those sentiments. So yeah, they do consent.
Got it. Cool. I think we'll do one more question and then wrap it up. So there was some pretty obvious, there are obviously some very big differences between the Denmark model and the United States. And Chris actually pointed out to me in the chat that, you know, it sounds like even in a smaller municipality, the number of people and like staff involved in crime and extremism prevention is way higher than it would be in most municipalities over here. So besides something like, you know, completely revolutionize the entire criminal justice system, are there any specific, you know, lessons that you think that, you know, Americans in the United States more generally can learn from the Denmark CVE model?
That's a dangerous question. I mean, there's this guy, Bernie Sanders, he was talking about Denmark all the time. What could you learn? Well, I think, yeah, in terms of numbers of people working or pushing in the right direction, the awareness training, the getting the society involved in this, that's something that I think would work in the US as well. It's not about, you know, snitching or telling the cops about what someone is doing. It's about worrying for your community, and if everybody has a sense or an awareness, what is it, what does it look like, and not just violent extremism, but also like when in terms of like school shootings, you know, there will be precursors. You will be able to see some signs ahead of something bad happening, and if people learn to recognize those signs and have a place to report them safely, where if you're going to report on something that's concerning you, but you know that the guy you're concerned about is going to get locked up for sure, you might hold back your concerns. But if you have the faith that this information is being processed in a good and righteous manner, if you have that trust, I think, yeah. So maybe an advice, maybe not. I don't know.
Morten, over to you, Chris.
Morten, thank you so much for joining today. Thank you, everybody, for joining the webinar. We didn't get a chance to go over everyone's questions. You can always reach out to me directly through email. You can find me on the CTEC website. I'm available at kmcguffey@middlebury.edu. I have learned a ton from Morten in the time we've known one another. So some of the things that you've asked that we didn't get around to, I actually have a few answers that I can share. And anything else, Morten is used to me bugging him with weird questions, because I think the Denmark model can continue to teach a lot of us about how to approach things differently. So I think that this is a great way to start the dialogue. I look forward to seeing more involvement. We're hoping to have more events in the spring semester. So thank you all. And then the recording will be available. We'll announce that through social media and our website, but feel free to share that and go back and kind of scour everything that we've covered, as we've covered a lot of ground. Take care, everyone, and thank you so much.